Thank you so much for being here today. We appreciate you for coming and joining this space with us. We are having our lunch and learn today with Class Catalyst and our featured friend Kyle Decker. We are super excited to have him here from the Air Force Academy High School in Chicago. He's got some amazing things to talk about. That's going to help us connect to our PLN. We are going to look at our problem of practice, and we are going to discuss how others are managing problems of practices as well. But before we do, let's go ahead and jump into a circle practice here, something that's going to get us connected. I'm going to invite you to pull out those cell phones and scroll through, just spending a moment or two looking for a picture from the last 3 months that brings you joy, something that says, oh, that was a really fun time. And I'm going to invite you to please send that to someone you always think about in the middle of the day that you want to connect with, but somehow never do. Find something that would just make their day. And then once you send it, try and make a mental note or even say to them, I'm in a meeting right now. I just wanted to send you a smile. I'm going to talk to you later. But please remember to talk to them later and actually connect with them. And feel free to do this when you have some time throughout the day. If you are scrolling through your phone, doom scrolling, whatever it is, let's find a way to make that phone a connective device that it is supposed to be. We all came to use phones to be phones to connect to each other, but the smarter they got, the less we leaned in on that. And that's something that Kyle's going to be talking about very much. Again, thank you so much for coming, Kyle, with our problem of practice being the impact of cell phones in schools. You wrote an amazing blog that we look forward to getting out there into the public. We had a great conversation last week that I just loved, and I walked away just really excited for this week to hear your thoughts and to dive a little bit deeper into these areas.
The kind of caveat here is we haven't tried this here yet. This is just an idea that's starting to bloom in my own head and the reasons why. But I wanted to present it to this group because SEL seems to be a little bit more your specialty, and sort of taking this cell phone issue as more of a mental health issue is the idea here. I'm not an expert in like counseling or social work or anything like that. And we haven't begun to try these practices, but I do want to have a conversation with people who know more than I do about what this approach could look like and if this approach has potential. Trying to take a smartphone away from a teenager is like fighting Gollum for his precious ring, because that's precisely what it is. We as educators are constantly trying to implement cell phone policies, and it's hard to enact consequences when parents are also tired of fighting these same battles or are pushing back themselves. Schools have been struggling with this for years, and attempted solutions have ranged from the ineffective, such as leaving it up to teacher discretion, to the outright nuclear, like statewide bans on cell phones in schools. However, if we're going to tackle this issue, we need to change our mindset and approach to it. Because when solutions are not working, it's time to rethink the problem. We have been approaching phones in school like a behavioral issue, but we may need to start framing it as a mental health issue. We need to accept that for many, technology is an addiction, and we need to treat it like one. Here, I will share some of the studies about smartphone addiction, reflect on how its impact on student behavior mirrors that of people suffering from substance addiction, and finally propose a possible template for school phone policies that address the issue as the addiction it is. So people can be and are addicted to technology. Numerous studies, including those by the National Institute of Health, have shown that phone usage triggers the same regions of the brain and the same neurochemical transmitters as other addictions such as gambling, sex, and cocaine. An NIH study concluded that, much like any addiction, people at a high risk of smartphone addiction have difficulty endogenously shifting their attention from distracting stimuli towards goal-directed behavior. and the frontal polo cortex plays a critical role in this self-regulatory control of attention. And this was from a study conducted in 2022. For our students, these alterations to the pleasure and reward centers occur when they are most susceptible, because we combine this with the fact that the prefrontal cortex, which handles decision-making, planning, executive function, and emotions, is not fully formed or developed until the mid-20s. In his book, The Anxious Generation, social psychologist and author Jonathan Haidt states, pornography, social media, and video games are three categories of activity most likely to lead to problematic use among adolescents, and years of problematic use may lead to lasting changes. Haidt goes on to say that while these addictions may not be chemical like drugs and alcohol, behavior addictions still leave people in a vicious cycle of problematic use where they may even be unable to act on their conscious desire to stop. The idea of wanting to stop but being unable to is central to the very definition of addiction. Even signs of technology addiction mirror those of drugs and alcohol. Just a few of the symptoms listed by Northwest Medicine are preoccupation with use, withdrawal symptoms such as restlessness and irritability, lying about use and lying to use, losing a sense of time, and risky behaviors such as jeopardizing work and educational opportunities. Sound familiar? And this is a list about more traditional addictions. This is about drugs and alcohol, but I know I've seen these behaviors in students over phones. We've all had a student say they're going to the bathroom, disappear for 20 minutes, and then when someone checks in on them, they're sitting in the stall looking at TikTok or playing Fortnite. Now they've missed instruction, which jeopardizes their grades and learning opportunities, and some even become irritable and aggressive when they're caught and called out. It may not be as bad as finding them using drugs, but the story checks so many of the same boxes you could cut and paste and make it an after-school special. We may not be used to looking at it that way because there have not been any very special episodes of sitcoms about the dangers of smartphones, at least as far as I know. But I do know we're all picturing more than one student who is obsessed with their phone, maybe a few dozen. And this is no accident. This is by design. For years, whistleblowers within the tech industry, such as former metadata scientist Frances Haugen, have been calling attention to the fact that these companies have been intentionally employing psychological principles and behaviorist techniques to addict users, especially teens. In a 2021 interview with 60 Minutes, Haugen stated, Facebook has realized that if they change the algorithm to be safer, people will spend less time on the site. They'll click on less ads. They'll make less money. Indeed, algorithms are designed to supply us with an endless stream of tailor-made content, which keeps us engaged no matter how many of those minutes we later regret, because there is money in it. Haugen and Haidt overlap on the topic of problematic use and vicious cycles as well. Referring specifically to young women's addiction to the Meta-owned Instagram app, Haugen stated, Facebook's own research says that these young women begin to consume this eating disorder content. They get more and more depressed, and it actually makes them use the app more. So they end up in this feedback cycle where they hate their bodies more and more. Much like drugs and alcohol, teens continue to engage in phones and social media not just despite the fact that it makes them depressed, but because of it. It's rooted in a disturbingly similar vicious cycle. Haugen has called attention to the fact that this was, at best, ignored and, at worst, intentional. Although something that makes phone addiction worse is its ubiquity. It's easier to abstain from drugs and alcohol. It's much harder to abstain from something our society has built itself around. Most schools at this point have some kind of cell phone policy in place. Generally, the policy goes something like this. Parents and students are made aware of the policy at the start of the year. Some schools might allow cell phones during lunch or passing periods, but generally it's made clear that phones should not be used during class time. Consequences are typically a warning, followed by confiscation, and this is where things generally fall apart. there are always those students who will react as if you're about to hack off a limb, which perhaps subconsciously is what it feels like to them. We can put them on phone tracks, contracts, and call home about it, but some parents have given up that fight too. Some schools have reported gradual buy-in to voluntary phone collection, and all of these policies have had varying degrees of success. But even with relatively successful plans, it is a constant and exhausting struggle. Let's face it, if teachers fought every phone that came out, no teaching would get done. So the question is, then what? What's the next step? The next step could be addiction counseling. If cell phones are an addiction, we should treat them like one. I think we can all agree that technology addiction is real. But did you know there are support groups for it, like there are for drugs, alcohol, sex, and gambling? One such group is the Internet and Technology Addicts Anonymous, or ITAA. ITA follows similar principles to Alcoholics Anonymous and even has a 12-step program. So my suggestion would be this. Establish a cell phone policy team at your school, which should include some students. Partner with parents of identified students and stage an intervention. This is key in that it helps establish this as restorative. So how do we determine who an identified student is? How do we target students for this intervention? My suggestion would be, as a team, establish a set number of cell phone offenses in a given period of days that constitute high risk for cell phone addiction. For example, X number of offenses in Y number of days. A set number of offenses in a given time will result in referral for technology addiction counseling. So some options might include revoking certain privileges, i.e. attending school events, participating in extracurricular activities, going to open gym during lunch. So these certain privileges would be revoked until a set number of counseling sessions are completed. For example, you need X number of sessions before you can do open gym again. These could possibly be tailor-made to the individual student's interests or things that are individualized for them. So depending on the endorsements of staff, like social workers and counselors, students could get this counseling in-house or be referred to these outside organizations. Similar to court orders for alcohol or drug-related offenses, the counselor running the meeting could sign off as a confirmation saying, oh, this student did meet with me. So when drafting these cell phone policies, obviously include these steps so that students and family are aware of them. And they're obviously, because of like approved vendors or partnering with outside groups, there's potentially that you might need to talk to the legal departments of your districts before you send anything out. Generally, this needs to happen with cell phone policies anyway. But this approach addresses the root problems of the cell phone issue, that people are addicted to them, and counseling has been a successful way that millions of people have navigated their reliance on drugs and alcohol. Also, this is a restorative practice, not necessarily a punitive one, because some students know full well that their use has become problematic and want to quit or reduce their smartphone use, but struggle to do so. Some surveys, including those by the Center of Technology and Internet Addiction, have estimated that 60% of teens are addicted to their phones. And let's just keep in mind, this is coming from the students who are able to recognize it and willing to admit it. So when it comes down to it, phones are drugs now. They are scientifically proven to be addictive, and they are this way by design. We know this. And since we know this, let's approach the issue as an addiction by identifying the most at-risk students with interventions and counseling. Maybe this plan has holes, and there are people who are far more qualified to speak on this than I am. But we need to start having this conversation. Because while doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome may not be the actual definition of insanity, it's still pretty ridiculous. We need a new approach, and this might be a place to begin. So that is more or less the audiobook version of the blog that I have crafted. And I think this is a conversation that is absolutely worth having. And I would love to have opportunities to brainstorm this further with people, or have this conversation happen in multiple venues with people with more know-how on these things. Because we have to rethink the problem here. I really think the issue is that we're not framing the problem correctly.
I love all of the things that you put out there, talking about how, students may not even know that they have this addiction happening. They may just see it as societal norm. Like, oh, everybody has their phone out. Everybody at dinner is like this. It's not just me. And so if
Right.
there's it's not just me, then how are they seeing it as a problem if everybody's doing it?
Right. Again, it comes back to that ubiquity issue. And no one, as far as I know, is ripping off car stereos to pay for Candy Crush hearts, like, someone might with a substance addiction. But it could have very well have happened for all I know. There's definitely all sorts of fraud occurring through phones financially too. So.
And it's not just something they're seeing the underground population do. It's not just something seen in the arts or something seen on the side. It's something you're seeing your grandparents, your parents, you're being ignored by somebody who's playing Candy Crush, and you're sitting like, you just watch the babysitter of the phone get put in front of a 2-year-old at a restaurant so they can just sit and eat peacefully, and no judgment there. It's just a fact that it happens. And that's introduced at such a young age. And like you talked about with the brain development, that frontal lobe isn't developed yet. And if we have children under the age of 2 using these things, their vision isn't even fully.
Yeah.
So we're getting a lot of nearsightedness. Definitely something that needs to be looked into here. And I love that you are saying, there's a difference between behavior and mental health. What's being impacted here?
Right. Well, it's the two often go hand in hand, But there was another book that I heard about after I had written this, that Chris Hayes wrote from MSNBC. It's called the Sirens Song, and it touches on a lot of these issues as well. And he was saying in an interview I heard with him, how even when Sony came out with the Walkman, back in the 80s, right, there was this general concern that oh, this is antisocial, listening to music by yourself, who does that? So at the last minute, they added a second headphone jack to the thing so that you could listen to it with somebody,
Interesting.
So it's just interesting how this has been a pervasive issue in technology for a while,
And when you look at the tech gurus in Silicon Valley, they don't let their kids have phones.
No, they don't, because they're the ones employ these behavior. You don't get high on your own supply. Again, if we're going to keep drawing, this analogy with drugs and alcohol, you don't get high on your own supply. That's rule number 1.
Absolutely. And I know you talked early on about, the nuclear option being banning cell phones. And I wanted to talk to you about that. We talked about this a little bit before. If we have this ban that goes into effect, that becomes law, and now we have teachers, what do they do when they see a phone? It's a broken law. Are we calling police? Is that something that then needs this drastic intervention? And then if we're just ignoring it, are we teaching students that some laws are to be ignored when they're not feasible?
Right.
What's your take on that piece?
I don't know. Some of my more libertarianly inclined friends have said, never make something a law unless you're willing to kick the door in, It kind of goes along that line, how far do you take it? I think part of it with that, because I know Illinois is considering it now, the pro side of it is, the very least, you say, hey, it's not me, my hands are tied. You have a higher up thing to point at and go, not me, it's not my rule.
Right.
So it sort of takes some of the burden, I guess, off the teachers with that. But again, I think it does sort of feel like a nuclear option, and I don't think it addresses the source of the problem. And I think that it treats the symptom of a problem, but it doesn't target the source of the problem, which is we have an entire population, quite frankly, the majority of our population is addicted to these things, including our students and children, you know. These weren't a thing until I was out of college. Smartphones were not a thing until I was out of college, and I held off a good 5 or 6 years before I got one myself. And I only did that because I moved to a foreign country and I needed a lot of like the maps and translator apps on it to live my life, you know. So, but then, as you said, there's like kids are being handed these things at the age of 2. So
Yes,
it's just like it's there, it's normalized.
it is. I've seen a baby when they showed them the iPad and then they showed them a magazine and the baby was broken. The magazine was broken. I was like,
Yeah,
the reading special in me about cried.
right.
But it is something that's here. It's something it's not just kids, it's adults too. Trying to get the phone away from some adults can be very difficult as well, myself included. I have found myself doom scrolling, guilty as charged.
Oh,
And
there's a special, yeah. Yeah, same. I took all social media apps off my phone.
makes it a lot easier.
It does. It makes it a lot easier not to doom scroll, although AP Newswire can be just as devastating. Yeah, my mental health, my regretted minutes, my mental health has improved. My regretted minutes are way down, you know. And on some of this stuff, I've had very frank conversations with students, just being like, okay, let's go ahead and, you know, in your phone, it'll tell you how long you used it yesterday. Are you happy with that number? Let's look at that. Are you happy with that number? And a lot of them are like, no. What are all of the things that you could have done? You know, so just, I think like, especially if you find the targeted students and just even having these types of conversations, you know, and again, there was a South Park episode years ago that was all about pot, but I think the same thing can be applied to cell phones, which is, look, is it as dangerous as a lot of people say it is? Maybe not, but it makes you okay with being bored. And it's when you're bored that you should be learning a new skill or taking up a hobby. And if you don't allow yourself to be bored, if you don't allow yourself that, you're going to grow up and find out you're not good at anything.
Boredom is the breeding ground of creativity and critical
It
thinking.
is.
And I think we do get an escape from that quite often. And I think this is a great place to start. Like you said, starting with the conversations, bringing it up, maybe even making some graphing activities, you know, they can be something like, so tell me, what was your screen time? And then we can graph that from everybody and start doing
Right.
this. And maybe it'll be an action research project the kids would be interested in taking part in. You know, they can do interviews, bring sociology into it, bring all the amazing components of a school day can be brought in around this action research project and have the kids start bringing answers to the board.
And I love that idea, actually, because that's, if we're going to use the parlance of our time, that's a tier 1 support right there, right? That's tier 1. That's not even, those types of activities wouldn't even be necessarily something that you might have to have some sort of endorsement to do either, is having those like self-reflective activities. And I know there's resources for that out there, but incorporating that into it, or even just taking these activities and, you know, the students that you do target, the students that do need that intervention, that are high risk for addiction, you can be like, okay, you have to complete this series of activities before if you want to go to prom or something, you know, or if you want to go on a field, but no field trips till you get this done, you know, until you really think about this and have it signed off on, you know.
And if it all stems from kids' research and kids' voices, kids saying, hey, I want my friend to pay attention to me instead of their phone, then I think it'll have a big impact, more than a governor saying you're not allowed to have your phone in a school.
Right, because then that just becomes
Us again.
draconian, you know. Oh yeah, here's the 60% thing. There were, I guess, a couple more slides left.
We got to talking too soon.
Yeah, no, that's fine. This is where we're supposed to be at. We should have this conversation. I hope this gets out there and like stirs the pot a bit, right? Again, I'm not an expert. I do have some background in journalistic things, and sometimes it's a matter of calling attention to something so that the people who are better suited to face that issue or to address that issue can get to talking about it.
And you hear the people sing.
Right.
Well, the question that we have, that we ask everybody who comes on here and is a featured friend of ours, what stresses you out and would like to see discussed in the future? This has been such an amazing path. Where do you see it going next?
I don't necessarily have a suggestion at the moment. Like towards the end of the year, my list is being checked off. So I'm not as stressed today as I normally am, I guess.
Thank you so much, Vienna. Rob, do you have any questions for Kyle about this topic, about his passion, his drive?
I'm a little curious just to hear about like what your students are saying when, when you're talking about this, with them, right? Like more.
Yeah. That's actually, some are in denial about it. Some definitely fall into the category of like, I know, but I can't stop. Many students, like I said earlier, I've asked students like, let's look at that number. Are you happy with that number? And a lot say, no, not really. And
Are a lot like totally fine with it though, saying like, oh, this is what I do, right? Like,
yeah, some. I want to see what the big deal is. I'm like, you're gonna be a boring person. Like you're boring, and you're gonna stay boring if you keep this up. Don't be boring. There's nothing worse than being boring. It also kind of the way to approach it entirely depends on the student. Some are entirely denial about it. Some rationalize it. It's all the same about approaching anybody about their addiction. Some are like, yes, I know, and I'm trying, but I can't. Some are, again, get aggressive about it. Some rationalize it. Oh, well, what about an emergency? I need it if there's an emergency. And this actually brings me back to something that the high school my mom used to work at before she retired, which incidentally was also the high school I attended. But smartphones weren't a thing when I attended. But the superintendent speaks to the parents at the orientation. And it's not always just that. I touched on this briefly in the blog and in my speaking earlier today, that it's not even always that parents are tired of fighting that battle too. Some parents are pushing back on it as well, on these cell phone rules, want their kid to have the phone. And that's a whole other can of worms. The book Anxious Generation touches on that too, where it's like you're keeping your kids on a shorter leash and now they're failing to develop independence too, because you have this digital leash on them 24/7. But like, what if there's an emergency? It's like, well, then call the school and we'll bring them down to the office and there can be adults present when they receive whatever emergency news you're giving them. Grandma died, I'm on the way to pick you up. You don't want to be alone in the hallway getting that on a text. Like a 14-year-old getting that alone in the hallway on the text. Like it might be much better wouldn't it be better for them to be in the office surrounded by like adults who can wait with them while you're on the way, or can be with them while you talk to them? So, again, this conversation also needs to happen with some parents as well.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Because that is the push-up that I hear is like, oh, well, I feel so much better when I know that I've got that phone. It is that digital leash. That's so true. Yeah.
100% what it is. And it's just like, it's 6 years old. I'd ride my bike around the neighborhood and my parents would have no idea where I was until the sun set. And of course they had to probably, all the neighbors along the street knew each other back in those days. So they'd just be like, oh, your son fell off his bike, but it's just that leash again. And it stunts independence.
And it can be harmful. Like when we talked last week, you brought up a point, like if there was an active shooting situation, do you want a bunch of cell phones going off showing where your kid's hiding?
Yeah, exactly. That's the point our assistant principal makes. Oh, what if there's a school like, Josh, you don't want your kid's phone going off? You shouldn't call your kid if there's But
those are great points that were brought up, and I appreciate it. When we do close, we'll post your recording with your slide deck attached, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Do you have any final words of wisdom on this topic or any topic you would like to share with those in the interwebs watching?
And if we're going to ask this of kids, we got to be conscious of it ourselves. When I'm going into classrooms, when I'm pushing into classrooms that are really where there's a lot of problematic cell phone use, I tell them, show a good faith. Mine's locked up in my locker. Like mine's locked up in the closet in my classroom right now. I don't have mine with me. Or I've said to like students, put the phone. Well, you have a phone. I'm like, yeah, but how often do you see me checking it in the middle of class? Maybe once in a blue moon, I'll get a check. I'll glance to see if it's work related. And if it's not, I put it back in my pocket. That's all you'll see me do with it,
The good old adage, don't ask of everyone what you wouldn't ask from one.
Yeah, and it's like, and then I often bring up, I have no social media on my phone and I'm a lot happier.
Yes, as I became happier when I took the apps off too.
Yeah, it's like my poetry output has been much larger lately, My self-reflection has been much, much better lately. I'm correcting my behavior better because I have a chance to think about it and feel bad about it, And then like, oh, I gotta stop doing that thing that makes me feel bad, because I have moments of self-reflection, sitting quietly.
Well, thank you kindly for your time today, for your thoughts, your ideas. I am greatly looking forward to getting this recording out and added to the video library and getting that blog out. And I hope to cross paths with you again in the future.
Sure. Likewise.
Greatly appreciate this time together.
Yep. Have a good afternoon.
You too.